Moscowitz here. Russ Winter is my guest. Winter Watch. Russ is becoming a regular in the program. He's got some very interesting data up there on Winter Watch. I urge people to go to that site. Some great articles, very much the kind of stuff you don't get in the mainstream press. Speaking Truth to Power. Russ has a book review up there today, Political Ponerology, a Psychological Anatomy of Evil, Politics, and Public Trauma. Russ, thanks for joining me, and let's get right to this. What's the book about?
Thanks for having me back, Charles. Sure. The writer, the psychologist or political psychologist that wrote this book on ponerology, political ponerology, is a Polish guy by the name of Andrew Labaskowicz. I can never get those Polish names, but that's close.
Okay.
His book is very dense. It's kind of written in sort of stilted English, and I eventually had to turn to quoted material by a writer by the name of Laura Knight Jadsky, who kind of cuts through the denseness in his book and really gets to a lot of the points. So I'll just kind of go through some of the key takeaways and points of this book and his concepts. And of course, the poneros is derived from New Testament Greek, meaning suggesting an inborn evil with a corrupting influence, a fitting description of psychopathy and its social effects. Basically what it is an extreme ambition and lust for power and financial gain, and is particularly evident in criminal or political psychopathy. And it's kind of, it's clear that the people that get into politics, there's something wrong with a lot of them. I don't think that people have much running power if they get into politics that are truly good people. They pretty much get snuffed out, end up like Paul Wellstone in some forest somewhere, in a plane crash, or, there are a few, like John F. Kennedy Jr. might have been a possibility. They killed him. So we talked about assassinations last time.
Right.
So I don't think anybody gets close to political power that has essential grace or goodness or, to them. They're basically very corrupted individuals by their nature. And they tend to attract more of the dominator types than other fields. And then the MO is to infiltrate, contaminate, appropriate, and eliminate. It's called ICE. ICAE is the term for that.
Yep.
So, I'll segue to you anytime you want to talk about the concept of evil.
Let me comment a little bit based on my own experience. I had a brush with politics in 2004 when I was asked by someone, kind of a political insider in Massachusetts, which is my home state, to run for Congress against Congressman Barney Frank. Now, I did do this. I had a full-fledged campaign. I raised $500,000. I debated Frank 5 times actually. And it was one heck of a roller coaster ride. But I could tell you that having been on the inside of this, there is something very intoxicating about it. I did meet a lot of other politicians, including some pretty big name people. I don't necessarily have to mention the names. But to a person, they were it's like a drug. I mean, they're hooked on this. You get this instant gratification. Reporters calling you, interviewing you. Your name is in the paper every day. You look at, people are stopping and wanting to shake your hand, and they're recognizing you on the street. And it's like you really can get a very inflated view of yourself very quickly. And it's very alluring, and it's very powerful. And I'm not going to deny the fact that I got caught up in it much more than I even realized at the time. And it took me years to kind of get over it and get down from it. But I can see that people who are in it and who are there and who are elected, it's a kind of an ego trip that you can't even imagine, even at a local level sometimes. And that when someone gets that kind of experience, that kind of almost adrenaline-driven action, that involvement, you will take extraordinary measures to make sure that you don't lose that position. You want to preserve it. You want to advance it. You want to get bigger and bigger. And it's almost like a drug. In fact, it is like a drug. And so I can totally see how people like, for example, the Clintons, how, they got into that kind of power and that kind of ego-driven experience, that they would do virtually anything to preserve their position, and that anybody that came along to threaten their position, they would do whatever they had to do to stop that from happening. They did not want, and they felt perfectly justified in doing it, because you get almost an exalted view of yourself. You hear people praise you all the time and attack you as well. You start to think you're really, really important, like almost messianic. So I think that might be what we're talking about here. It's a very, very difficult thing. It's a very rare political figure who can transcend that and not lose themselves in it. But I think most of them do, and most of them always have, going all the way back.
It seems like it seems like it's sort of an aphrodisiac for evil people too. There's a real attraction for them. And, evil really doesn't, evil in terms of religious discourse is treated kind of funny. It gets sort of the short shift as an error or a rebellion. And what this particular writer does is it says it's sort of like almost genetic. It's kind of built into a lot of people that they're just psychopathic. There's a whole lot of literature on who's psychopathic, how they get that way. We don't have to get into too much of that, but they tend to be attracted to power. I think that it's a lot of how people view the psychodynamics of personality are kind of warped. They tend to be kind of Freudian, and Freudian sort of attributed the same characteristics, exaggerated observations of the same characteristics to a broad scope of people. And that's not how it works. Now, this particular writer says that mankind has a natural predator, the psychopath, and this predator is invisible because there are no easily discernible markings that set him apart. In a society where evil is not studied or understood, they easily rise to the top and proceed to condition normal people to accept their dominance, to accept their lies without question. The trick of the psychopath's trade is to make us believe that evil comes from others. So that's sort of the premise of it. Now, today's world, I can see it all the time. People just look the other way. I mean, just evil's right in the face. They just don't see it. They kind of explain it away. It's just almost a strange universal phenomena among human beings that they just don't recognize that other people can be this strange and evil.
I think that's exactly what is going on. In a way, I mean, I'm studying sociology, and there's a sociological concept called the control factor. It's similar to the Stockholm syndrome. It involves the internalization of certain ideas that have both a good and a bad side to them, but people tend to incorporate those ideas or ideologies to such a high degree that they turn a blind eye to the bad side, and they simply excuse it, or they view it as something that's necessary to reach some kind of a greater good. This is the whole calling card of much of the really evil ideologies that have come up in every generation. And in our own, I would say it's communism, Nazism, radical Islam, the three big ones that plague us now. And that we don't want to believe the evil side of these things when we're involved in them. We want to somehow feel that because they're so horrible, we want to feel like we have some control over our lives and our ability to counter them. So we excuse the evil, thinking that we can change it somehow, when we can't. Right. You cannot change these things. They are what they are, and they will play, because the people that are involved, the psychopaths that you talk about, and I don't mean to pick on the Clintons. We could talk about a lot of people, half of Hollywood, probably most of it, much of our business leaders. They believe that, they're very charming people. They're very, there's a reason that they figured out how to get there. They know how to hypnotize us. They're wizards, basically.
Well, the key element they have too that really gives them an advantage over everybody else is their cold-bloodedness. They just have ice water in their veins, and it's very bizarre. And it's so completely outside the normal person's personal experience that they can seldom even guess at this condition. I mean, you have to really be looking for it all the time. I've probably looked for it obsessively. I'm kind of a very unusual person that way, that I just kind of constantly see it. And I have this little phrase in my writing: "Is nothing to see here, move along." I always just ask the question, is what you see here nothing to see here, move along? That's my constant refrain, kind of the motto of the site. But these people are so free of internal restraints, and they have the key is unhampered liberty. And I think that's what the Sabbatean Frankists were all about. I think that's what the Luminists were all about. They just believed, or serial killers like Israel Keyes or Ted Bundy, when you look at them, their big thing was unhampered liberty. They didn't want anybody telling them what to do or restraining them in any way, carrying out whatever little ideas came to mind, any little concept that came to mind. They have no pangs of conscience. So they're completely the opposite of what I call the kingdom of conscious, which is, even if you're not a religious person, you realize there's a certain universality, which I call the kingdom of conscious, versus nothing. And so they're into nothing. Unhampered liberty is basically sort of a nothingness. And it's a big threat to the world. They've organized around a lot of different concepts that, some of them maybe we'll get into a little bit later, but they're kind of invisible. And this gives them huge secret, kind of strange form of really black magic advantage over the majority of people who are kept in line or handicapped by their consciousness and are unaware that not all people operate from a place of personal integrity. There's another writer by the name of Robert Hare who wrote a book called Without Conscience.
Mm-hmm.
And he argued that we live in a camouflage society, a society in which some psychopathic traits like egocentricity, lack of concern but for others, superficiality, style over substance, being cool, manipulative, are increasingly tolerated and even valued. You're getting to the point where you could be like a gangbanger or a rap star or something like that, and you've got a whole slew of people valuing you as an individual for wearing the bling and the
you're rewarded for it. You're rewarded for what you call unfettered liberty, and you're punished if you question it. And I think that what happens is that we, probably at a fairly young age, maybe adolescence, maybe teen years, most people, maybe not most, but many people, will sell their souls in a certain way. I mean, I don't want to get religious here, as you say, but you see where which side of the bread is buttered on. You see the easier way to go in life. You see where the rewards are, where the beautiful people are. You see the path of least resistance, which is normal in a certain way.
Yeah, well, it's a hedonistic view of happiness, is what it is.
Well, exactly. It's Epicurean, but the point is that most people choose to take that path, and they internalize it. They sell out. They embrace a very easy couple of principles that never have to be questioned again, and they go forward. And it gets into something you're also talking about. And I mean, I'm taking it, I go at this from a religious perspective or a faith-based perspective, in that Whittaker Chambers, the great communist spy, the author of the book Witness, he was a communist. He helped, subvert the Roosevelt administration. And people inside the administration are working with him, like Alger Hiss and others who were helping Stalin during World War II or before. And he broke with communism, mainly because he realized when they were allied with Hitler, that was too much. And then he exposed the conspiracy in the 1940s in the great trial of the century, where he exposed Hiss, who was this hero, this doyen of the Eastern Seaboard liberal establishment. He was the founding chairman of the United Nations Conference. He was, the Undersecretary of State who was sitting at Roosevelt's right hand during the Yalta Convention, and then he goes off and meets Stalin. He exposed this, and he upset the whole apple cart of this rotten, amoral, power-hungry, internationalist Eastern Seaboard establishment, as it was called. And, he presented in his book, Witness, particularly in the first chapter, it's a brilliant book, that man has a choice between God or man. He said that it goes back to the sin of the Garden of Eden, when Eve was promised by the serpent that if she partook of the forbidden fruit, she would know all things. She would know good and evil. She would be God, basically, that she would overthrow God and that man would rule the universe. And she partook of the fruit, and when she involved Adam in it, it became a conspiracy because there was two of them. And Chambers refers to this as the world's first communist conspiracy. And he points out that communism is the second oldest religion, and that it is an attempt to overthrow God and nature's God. It's to overthrow the order of the universe and replace it with the rule by these corrupted elites, these enlightened so-called elites, people who feel that they know better.
Yeah, it's an escape into a very naive doctrine.
People convince themselves that they're smarter than the rest of us. And that's when you start with this conspiracy. And he does use the word conspiracy, although he doesn't say it's an organized conspiracy in terms of people getting together in a room somewhere. He refers to it as a conspiracy of gentlemen. And I think that's kind of an accurate depiction. It's not necessarily people who coordinate. A lot of them hate each other and they kill each other. But they all are of a same mindset, which is that they know better about how to run the world than their fellow neighbors, and their regular citizens know how to run their own lives.
Well, and it really makes it tough for the rest of us because they won't subject themselves to any moral criticism. They just they'll react by taking down your YouTube videos, taking down your articles. That's what we're seeing today with this mass censorship. You can't, society needs to have the psychological skills to morally criticize this type of behavior you're just describing, the psychopathic behavior. Right. And it's being constantly removed. That's the most frustrating thing I see of anything going on in contemporary affairs. Just this constant removal. You can't criticize anybody.
By the psychopaths themselves.
Yeah, you can't criticize them. You can't criticize anything. They've just got everything. I was just brought up differently. I'm older. I came from the Midwest.
That we're talking about here.
Huh?
One of the most basic aspects of the psychopathy that we're talking about here is the ability to lie. And when I say lie, I don't mean just telling, fibs and outright lies. I mean embracing the idea at an early age that it's okay to lie, right, and that it's in fact a virtue to lie if it advances a cause, and that the entire structure of what they believe in and what they embrace at that early age is a lie. It's based on a lie, which is that man is superior to God, which is that man can change human nature, that we can make this new kind of man, which is impossible. It's, man is man. You cannot alter or change an individual. An individual can maybe change aspects of their own lives based upon their own values and their own choices, but you're not going to, they literally want to biologically change entire societies to fit some kind of a vague image. And in order to do that, they have to lie, and they understand that, and they hold that as a virtue. So they don't believe in truths, but they learn how to act. In a way, it's another sociological term, dramaturgy. They get up, when you look in the mirror, you're doing dramaturgy. You're saying, who do I look like? What am I presenting today? Well, these people learn how to do that at a very high level. They present an entire image that is completely untrue. It's a manufactured image in order to manipulate and fool the rest of us into thinking that they are like us.
Yeah, see, then we end up getting sort of this truncated information. And when we get the truncated information from what you just described, you can't come up with a correct conclusion. You're fooled. And what they're doing, they're substituting convenient lies to replace uncomfortable truths, which basically brings you to a psychopathological state. And so in such a society where all the hidden truths lurk below the surface, like an iceberg, disaster is just around the corner. So that's sort of the principle of his book.
Yeah.
They're stericalizing society, which enables pathological plotters and other deviants to act in implementing evil on a micro social scale. So I've got another little excerpt, some good comments by an author by the name of Martha Stout, The Psychopath Next Door. And she writes, those who have no conscience at all are a group unto themselves, whether they be homicidal tyrants or merely ruthless social snipers. Conspiracies will arise simply as a natural result of the unbridgeable divide between normal people and deviants. That's your definition of conspiracy right there. Of course, you've got a bunch of deviants and you have a bunch of normal people, and normal people are spotting things that don't look right. Well, that's a conspiracy. That's a conspiracy theory. That's kind of how they beat you down. So they just create this active network of common collusions, potentially estranged from the people, the community of normal people. And she goes on to say they collected it together with similar worldviews, like fat floating on a bowl of soup. When one of them begins to rant, others like them, or those with brain damage that make them susceptible, rally around the flag, so to say. And what's more, they know this and they know how it works. And I don't know if I'll give everybody a good read. Go read Anton LaVey's Secret Life of a Satanist in the Satanic Bible, because that's pretty much all he talks about. Just how to fool people, how to pull the wool over people's eyes, trickery, black magic, white magic, whatever.
Well, it's the very essence of Satanism, to turn everything on its head and to make people think it's standing up. This is the great skill, as you point out, and as he pointed out, of the Satanist. This is when you look at a satanic mass, they take all the images of the Catholic mass and they invert it. They turn it upside down. They turn it. It's the exact opposite. It's glorifying good and condemning. It's glorifying evil and condemning good, basically. And this is the philosophy of a lot of people in power. Now, when someone gets to a position of power, after having internalized these ideas, usually at a young age, and after playing the game and sending out the signals that they are part of this and that they want to uphold it and advance it, I think that there are several things that might happen. One of those things is blackmail. I think a lot of our leaders have stuff going on, in the closet, so to speak, and they are controlled as such. They've compromised themselves. I mean, a good example of historically was President Woodrow Wilson. He had an affair while he was married, and that this information was known to people around him who manipulated him and were able to control him because they threatened to release that information to the public. And I think that there's something like that with most of our leaders, quite frankly. There is something that they've done that they could hurt them, could destroy their career, their reputation, their life. And so they're more easily controlled. I think a lot of people who are in those positions are like that, then they're willing to compromise thus in order to preserve those positions and do the bidding of people who are less visible.
Well, the Ponerology theory pretty much states that. They call them proto-psychopaths. I call them flying monkeys. And so you have to control people that aren't pure psychopaths or sociopaths, because not everybody is fully committed that way. But they basically say about 4 to 6% of the entire population, particularly in places like America, where it's just being drummed at you continually, and particularly warfare, it goes even higher. Then the psychopaths really come out, and on all sides. I mean, in World War II, I don't care what side it was, the psychopaths just came out in droves. Russia, Great Britain, the United States, Japan, Germany, the psychopaths ruled that entire war. That's why you definitely have to avoid war, or particularly total war. So they control the flying monkeys, or the quasi-psychopaths, or the useful idiots, through the blackmail method. I think that's huge. That's almost like an entire hour discussion that we could get into. But the the real rule are pure psychopaths. They don't need any of that. They don't need to be blackmailed. They're just into it. They're evil enough that they don't even particularly, they'll join in, because it's all a big party. So they'll participate in any kind of deviance that's necessary. But their control of the flying monkeys is through the method that you just described.
Well, there are what I've called the witting and the unwitting. The witting are the people who are conscious members of this conspiracy. The unwitting are sort of those who have sold out, and they're the camp followers. They want to be part of the beautiful people. They want the awards. They want something easily handed to them, and they don't want to be punished, because every so often the conspiracy holds up an example of someone who stepped outside of the norm, and they have an auto da fe, public lynching of that person. And so there's a subtle message there, like, hey, this could be you if you step out of line. I think they're trying to do that to President Trump, actually. And thank goodness he's a strong enough man to stand up to it. But there's this idea that if you step out of the establishment view, you're going to be completely and utterly, wiped out. We'll get you. And so there's a fear factor. But you mentioned earlier the censorship going on Google and YouTube. I think that's now been exposed by several legitimate people, particularly James O'Keefe from the Project Veritas, who's done some really good work as an investigative reporter, and also someone on the inside who leaked it to Breitbart, and they did a very good article about this, in that Google and Facebook, and assumedly YouTube, because it's owned by Facebook, they are setting up these analytic systems that will edit out any particular opinion that they don't like, what they euphemistically call hate speech. And this is very much a part of this psychopathic agenda. You look at the Communist Manifesto, you look at the classic dictionary definition of socialism, public ownership of the means of communication. That's what this is. They don't want to have someone come by like yourself and rip a little hole in the fabric. And maybe expose some sunlight. They want to control all things that happen and all things that are known. And so that's what we're up against here. What say you?
Well, okay, I think this ties in what Labashusky says. It ties into that. He calls the kind of the followers, the camp followers, he calls them characteropaths. Mm-hmm. That's the term he uses. And so the kakistocracy has knowledge about the existence of susceptible individuals and how to work on them and how to recruit them. It's called a transpersonalization process. And the duration of the results of this phenomenon vary, but some of these people later become zealots. Others take advantage of various circumstances to withdraw and establish their lost links to the society of normal people, but then they're replaced. He was talking about it under communism in Poland, which he experienced. And so anybody like the old Keeves or the people that are trying to do God's work or trying to do some justice, they'll just replace them. Oh, yeah. I hate to sound too skeptical, but that's how it works. That's how the game works. They just sort of disappear, never to be heard from again. And the way they do that is that Reddit, I'm noticing that Reddit has taken down anybody that posts Veritas Project's videos is now banned on Reddit. That's pretty. Yeah, and
YouTube took down Veritas as well. Now, is Veritas involved with hate speech? Not at all. They're reporting on YouTube. They're reporting on Google. They've got video of people saying different things. That's what journalism is supposed to do. That's what, when the Founding Fathers codified the First Amendment to the Constitution and recognized as this is a natural right, they didn't create free speech so people could say, fuck you. You know what I mean? They created it so people would report on political corruption, not so that they wouldn't use curse words. That's how we're told what it is now. This is the whole purpose of free speech. Because if we don't have the reporting of political corruption, not to mention criminal corruption, of course, then we're going to fall into it in a very high level. It's necessary. The left is likes to attack President Trump for talking about journalists as being enemies of the people. But yet what they want is a controlled media that doesn't really report stuff. And Trump is calling them out and saying that they're not doing their jobs. They should be. We need journalists to go out and do deep investigations. People like James O'Keefe. These are the people that we should look to as our heroes. I mean,
you just got too many quasi psychopaths in there. It's really unbelievable. It really is. We talked about Tim Russert.
Yes, we did.
Maybe an example of somebody who's outside of that. This is really a full court press. It's just really hard to find anybody that gets this at all. The psychopathy is so ingrained with so many people participating, and then you got everybody else. The prevailing culture is zombieism. We're in really bad shape. I'm very, very discouraged. I hate to kind of wrap up my life and leave this kind of world on to my kids and my grandchildren. I really feel for them. It's sickening. I get very emotional about it.
Yeah.
I mean, and I always look for people to step up to the plate. It's just hard to find.
It is, and all we can do is the best work we can to expose it, to identify it, and to personally know God. I think that the whole phenomena really took on a bigger life starting in the early part of the 20th century, with the government taking control of the issuance of currency through a Federal Reserve, through the culture, through the development of the great foundations and the nonprofits, which was part of the 16th Amendment, and direct taxation, and through religion. Basically, they co-opted much of what we consider to be faith by various means and through organizations. And they interact, they interlock with each other. This is a massive, over-the-top, establishment that controls as many aspects of our lives and our culture as they can. I mean, President Trump and his chief aide, Stephen Bannon, made reference to this when they talked about the deep state. But there's just so much they can do, and they've probably been compromised to a certain extent.
Well, I mean, I'll have to differ with you a little bit on Trump. He's not. Okay. I am not a fan of Trump. But I agree with about 98% of what you say on all this stuff. But he's no savior. I'm sorry to tell you, but we can agree to disagree on that. And
that's right. And I don't say he's a savior. I'm just saying, at least put it this way: I don't think the establishment expected him to win. He did not fit into the usual, and neither did John F. Kennedy, by the way. But Trump did not fit into the usual Eastern Seaboard view. He's kind of a bit of a wild, card in the deck. He's not somebody, I think, who's easy to blackmail because he doesn't need this. He's wealthy. He's famous. Everyone knows he's got a checkered past. There's nothing new. So I think that Trump is someone, this is strictly my opinion, we may not agree, but I think that he is someone who has reached the high end years of his life, and he's decided he wants to do something and maybe give something back to this country. I really do. I think that's what I pick up from him. He doesn't need this. He's not getting any, he doesn't need more fame or money. I mean, he's got that already. If anything, this has hurt him and it's hurt his family.
Well, I kind of see him as actually a Trojan horse to kind of, but
look at
any rate, anywho.
We can't know totally.
Okay, so just to kind of wrap up on this impact on normal people, I think this is pretty good.
Let's do it.
The kakistocracy has also learned how their personalities can have a traumatizing effect on the personalities of normal people and how to take advantage of this root terror for purposes of reaching their goals. The methods of psychological terror, the techniques of psychological arrogance, and the striding roughshod into other people's souls initially has such traumatic effects that people are deprived of their capability of purposeful reaction. And they just run this terror stuff around the clock. To be honest with you, I've looked at some of this terror stuff, and I challenge other people to really look at some of it closely. I think a lot of it are tricks. I think they're hoaxes. They're staged.
Right. I mean, is these events of like shootings and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, you got to start looking at them because I don't think people really do. I've looked at them in great detail, and I've kind of looked at the kind of magic being used. You never see good photography. You see grainy photography. You see the use of a lot of CGI. They never provide CCTV cameras or anything. And we have a society just riveted with CCTV cameras, and yet they never really show them. Why? Because they're worried about some delicate flower being hurt or traumatized. Well, they've already traumatized the population with this stuff.
I don't think I actually don't think that most people want to see children with their heads blown off. And
maybe not, but that works to the psychopath's advantage. It's one of these. It's kind of one of those.
I mean, I just look. I don't know what's going on with it. I mean, I think that we need to do. I mean, you're trying to do this. We need to look at this phenomena in the same way that we would look at a plane crash. When a plane crashes, the FCC, whatever agency, they go in and they do a full examination of every aspect of what happened. They look at the design, they look at the age of the plane, they look at human error, they look at the mechanics, they look at everything that can be looked at so they can see what they can learn as a way to reduce the likelihood of it happening again or to make plane flying safer. I think we need to look at this phenomena in that same dispassionate, non-political way in order to get to the bottom of exactly what's going on here. The problem is that it's become very political. It's a political football that people have various agendas.
And who's doing the examination and controlling the examination?
Well, it has to be some kind of an impartial group of people. Instead of all the screaming, you have to have gun control. There used to be a lot more guns back when I was growing up than there is now. And it was a lot easier to get guns. So it's obviously not that. What is it, though, that makes someone pick up a gun and go in and start shooting children in an elementary school? That's what needs to be looked at. That's something that is happening. And I think that there's one thing that does stick out to me right away, and it's something that nobody wants to talk about, but everybody knows. And that is the use of psychotropic drugs. These are highly controlled substances. They've been introduced, and why they've been introduced into society, that's a big question too. But these are things that have been introduced into society in accord with the rise of these murders. And if you look at the fine print on these drugs, you'll see it says, tendency toward suicide, tendency toward homicide, tendency toward all sorts of stuff. And when you give a drug like that to a young person, an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, someone who is not yet physically developed enough, let alone mentally or emotionally developed enough to handle such a highly concentrated substance, then yes, you're going to have a recipe for things
like at minimum, you're depriving that person of his natural rights to practice his own mental hygiene. And that's big. And so once you can't practice your own mental hygiene, then you're susceptible to all these machinations and skullduggery that we're talking about. So
That's right. I mean, but it seems to me that this is one of the major trigger pieces. And we could talk about how society has dumbed down children with, taking away phonics, and so you have illiteracy and you have dyslexia and various, social and educational disorders, and how that's deliberate. This is a topic that was covered at length by my very dear friend, Dr. Samuel L. Blumenfeld, the late Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld, who I did many, many hours of programming with, and who had devoted his life to researching. He's written some excellent books and articles on the topic of education and how the change agents, the leftist, establishment, starting with John Dewey, totally perverted our education system by trying to turn children into human resources, basically engaging in almost a form of lobotomy on children so that they would not be able to think independently and have cognitive skills that could lead to an independent life. He wanted to turn our society into a collectivized, communized society. He admired Stalin went to Russia, visited Stalin. He was, an open, big time leftist internationalist.
Yeah, autotrons or delta epsilon people is kind of what they're called. What the Orwellian term for it is. Well, it's just it's what happens is that when you treat people this way through the education you're talking about, the drugs, the entertainment, then individuals progressively lose their emotional color and their ability to intuit psychological situations.
They can't think cognitively, and I think it also does something to the brain.
Definitely.
So you have a guy like John Dewey and his other Marxists, who are the so-called fathers of progressive education, who want to turn this nation into a part of a one-world ant colony. And then on the more slightly allegedly conservative side, you've got the big industrialists like the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the Brown brothers and the Harrimans and all of this huge combine of Protestant wealth. And they want to turn Americans into, docile employees who will punch a time clock, who will go into these factories where we have 5,000 people and who aren't going to complain too much and aren't going to question too much. So they both formed an alliance, and this is according to Sam's research, and it's brilliant. They formed an alliance, an unholy alliance, to create these, human resources, as they call them today. And that's why you have then, of course, there's a reaction of people picking up a gun eventually. I mean, what do you expect?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm surprised there's not a full-scale revolution, but there's not. People are too zombified for that.
That's what they did. I mean, exactly.
I guess the thing I would posit, if you really think about picking up a gun, if you're going to pick up a gun, are you really? Let's say you're inclined to strike out the system. Are you really going to go down to a church or a mosque or a synagogue and kill little old ladies? Really? That's your game plan? That's real? I mean, I just don't believe it. I don't believe it's happening. I think if it was really happening, they'd be striking at the heart of the beast, and you don't see any of that. It's amazing. So I just don't accept this idea that crazy people go and kill little church-going Black people in Charleston. And I've looked at these incidents.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that.
And I know it throws people off, and people don't want to hear it.
We could talk about that. We could talk about that. I saw your article on Winter Watch where you point out that this guy, Dylan Roof, who shot up those old church ladies and the minister in a Black church, that, you brought up a couple of little inconvenient aspects of who he actually was. But that was used as an attack on conservatives, as an attack on, the Confederate images and all of that stuff. But talk a little bit about that. I mean, what was going on with that? Who was he, and why did he do this?
I think he's just a cutout persona. Now, I've looked at. We could go into these deceptions a little bit, and I've kind of looked at some of them at one time. For instance, the Batman shooter in Aurora.
Yes,
I think he was drugged and sent in there.
Yeah, no,
either that or he was one hell of an actor, because
every single one of these people, if you look at their background, all the way back to Columbine and whatnot, they were all on some kind of a psych drug. Every one of them.
Mind control, yeah.
That's right.
Now, I got to be one of the few people on the planet that's actually listened to the 4-hour interview of his psychiatrist of him before his trial. It's on tape. I don't even know if you can get it anymore. I mean, I keep having to replace this stuff. I put it up. It just aggravates me to no end, because then it goes into the memory hole and I find it again. But you could go to my article and you can watch all 4 hours of it if you want, or I have some of the high points. I'm probably the only guy on the planet that's looked at the police interview of Dylan Roof. The guy makes so many mistakes. He doesn't even know how many people he shot. He sat there in a room for half an hour, sizing the situation out, and he doesn't have any idea what happened. He's just not describing a situation that you would be in. The timestamps are all wrong when he goes into the church. The film is all grainy. These are basically designed to promote this hate speech agenda. The hate crime, create this false hate crime. Everybody's a hater. We've got to do
Not only that,
pre-crime.
but according to your research, he really doesn't even have a background of having anything against black people. I mean, he had black friends, and his posts on his Facebook page, and there was no indication that he was some kind, into some kind of a race thing anyway.
Well, then they have these ridiculous manifestos where they don't make any sense. They've got these, sitting around with, he's a Rhodesian apartheid patch collector. He's posing in front of Confederate flags, burning American flags. I mean, it's just so comical. Whoever's writing these narratives is really just laughing their belly off at the wool they're pulling over people's eyes. People have got, I know people don't like to look at this stuff, and really there isn't much to see. If you looked at the Dylann Roof case, there isn't anything to see. There's no photos of any of the carnage. There's no evidence of any kind of a crime. I've looked at all of it. I've looked at everything available to try to find out if this is actually something that happened. I see no evidence whatsoever. And this just keeps going on and on and on and on. And this is going to turn people off. I've already been through all this. And I know there's a lot of people that see it the way I do, but most people don't. And I think it's maybe designed to steer people away from the message. They kind of throw this out there, hoping that they'll catch some people that are alert, commenting on it, and they go, ha ha, look at that. This guy's really a crazy conspiracy. But look at it for yourself. Just look at these cases for yourself. I've documented, I'm getting kind of tired of it. I don't like to do it anymore, but I have it in another instances. He's a cutout. This is a complete canard.
What do you think was behind it?
The idea is to generate ethnic hate, to get black people to hate white people, to get white people to hate blacks, to get Muslims to hate Europeans, to get Europeans to hate Muslims, to get everybody at each other's throats.
Yeah, no,
I think that's what it is. I think it's basically major agitation, a very evil, very evil agenda. Now, the only thing I'll say for them, I think in the old days, they used to really kill people, but I think they switched gears because it's too easy for things to go off the rail when you have real victims. I mean, when you have real victims, the mothers want justice, the families want justice, they want investigations, they want to know the truth. You don't see any of that now. Now everybody's got an agenda. You'll get within days, you'll have these so-called parents lobbying for whatever, pre-crime intervention, mental health intervention, more security for this, gun control, just on and on and on. They just kind of run these agendas. There's big charity or things going on. Huge GoFundMe charity deals. They make a lot of money.
And look, I mean, it all has to do with the fact that when we see something like this, it is so horrifying and so frightening, and we all feel so much fear ourselves because we go to synagogues, we go to movie houses, we do these, we're out in public, our children are out there, I mean, our children are at colleges or wherever, we feel that we want to control something. There's this idea that our reaction is we have to do something. And I think that maybe what they do in the wake of these horrors is people step in and offer some kind of an alleged solution, and they raise money while they do it. It's like, oh, okay, well, let's get on this particular bandwagon.
If it really starts coming down, and I think what you said about the drugs and everything really rings true. It's a big factor. But if it starts really coming down, it's going to happen. They're going to go after the heart of the beast. They really are. They're not going to be going after little old ladies in synagogues. It's just not going to happen that way. This is nonsense.
Right.
It just doesn't make any sense. And then everybody's got a manifesto, and the manifesto. Have you ever read any of the manifestos? They're a joke. They're script. They're friggin' scripts written the same every time. Whether it's, and then the thing in New Zealand, they'll put you in jail for evaluating the shooting, the fake shooting, the grainy fake shooting where you don't even see anybody really getting shot. I have challenged. I bet you that the listeners of this podcast
Mhm.
I bet you that 99% of you have never even seen that video.
Yeah, I haven't. I've
Well,
seen that. Actually, I saw.
then you're not in a position to judge. You really aren't, unless you start looking at the evidence. There's a clip in there. This is how I'll tell you how I got banned from Reddit. I'm kind of going on a rant here. I'm sorry.
No, please.
I got banned from Reddit for kind of putting up a video of a little part of the Christchurch shooting, which showed this, what I consider like a fake gun, discharging shells. The shells in slow motion just completely disappear in midair. It's the most amazing video you've ever seen. They don't even hit the ground. How can you fire a gun? He's not firing anything. He's out on the sidewalk just shooting at nothing. There's no people. And the shells just disappear. Well, if you go back and you look at that early part of the video, the same thing is happening. This is cartoon world. So that's part of the black magic, is getting people into this cartoon world mentality where where some talking head can explain what happens and then shame you for even examining it. And then if you do examine it, they throw you in jail or prohibit you from ever posting again at Reddit. This is just unconscionable.
The enemies become the people who are trying to expose what happened,
Right,
rather than the people who actually did the crime.
precisely.
And the same thing has happened with criticizing or studying the Islamic doctrines that have led to some of the radicalized Islamic movement, the Sharia documents. If you analyze those, you're going to be banned. I mean, if I read portions of the Quran and the Hadith and some of the Islamic law, if I read them on my video station, I would be banned. And I wouldn't even do it with any commentary. I mean, just simply took a look at the nature of these doctrines and how they may have contributed. I think they did contribute to radical Islamic terrorism.
That's part of the intent of all these events, is to get you so you can't examine, criticize, discuss anything. They've been very successful at that. They've created this whole hate environment that these people are haters, that anybody that would dare question these narratives, these ridiculous manifestos, these ridiculous footage, it's very, very deep black magic. It's really awful. And so the end result is exactly what you say. You can't criticize, you can't evaluate. Whether I agree with you or not is irrelevant, but you can't do it. You're going to get
right. Well,
shamed.
They're setting it up so that you cannot, in a way we can look at, what can't be criticized. I mean, it's really a left-wing thing. I mean, it's a public ownership of the means of communication. They're going to decide what is permissible and what isn't in the public discourse. And, look, I mean, I feel almost reluctant to say this because I actually have a lot personally invested in the YouTube. Although I will tell you, I've set up alternative stations in case they pull it down. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if one day I turn on my YouTube and find it's gone. I've heard this has happened to people. So that's why I have Podomatic, and I have other venues where people can find my videos. And who knows, I suppose I could take it all down, but what can you do? I mean, it's just, they're now very much controlled by these what have been euphemistically called these change agents and self-described change agents who want to have a particular view, very much what I would describe, and you've illustrated, as a psychopathic cult, and that they're going to decide what is permitted and not permitted on the internet, which doesn't surprise me. Now, look, I understand that we can't have, you have Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes once said that free speech doesn't mean you can yell fire in a crowded theater. So I understand that you cannot go and shouldn't go on YouTube and call for violence or call for any kind of a overthrow of the government, because that's sedition, and we've had laws in place against that going all the way back to John Adams and the Alien and Sedition Act. I mean, and I accept that. That's already in place. That's not new. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about controlling opinions that are simply trying to look at the news behind the news. They're trying to understand the course of events in our lifetime and what really may have happened. That is free speech. I mean, that's not yelling fire in a crowded theater. You know, what James O'Keefe did by exposing Google, that's not yelling fire in a crowded theater. That's exposing corruption. And the fact that that has been banned is an absolute disgrace.
Well, the final sentence of this article, which I extracted from the woman who summarized it, was perfect. She says, "Being healthy-minded and positive, a good sport with never a discouraging word, is seen as a good thing, and anyone who predicts dire consequences as a result of such insouciance is labeled a wet blanket or a killjoy or worse."
Mm-hmm.
That's the world we're in.
Yeah.
Don't look there. Nothing to see here. Move along. Don't scrutinize that too closely. And the indicators of it should be very clear to any thinking person. Why is it banned? Why did O'Keefe's video get banned everywhere? Why? For what possible reason? Why can't you go and look at the Christchurch alleged shooting and examine it for yourself? What possible reason is there for banning that? I could go on and on and on. I just do it all the time. That's what half of my article's on. That's the same question. Why can't you see the CCTV camera footage at the Nice, France truck ramming?
Exactly. No, it's
why did the French police seize that from the Nice police? The Nice police protested and they took it away. Why?
Look, I mean, they're still covering up the Kennedy assassination. I mean, we could go back. In fact, if you look at the National Archives, there's still classified information about the War of 1812. I mean, there's a lot of secrecy, and it's the American people and individuals are smart enough and are secure enough to know the truth. It's not. There's absolutely no rational reason to keep these things secret. I mean, I did some research. I was going to write a book on the communists. This was years ago in the Roosevelt administration. I happened to be down in Washington, D.C., mainly doing something with my family. And I took some time and I went to the National Archives to look up some information. And I found out that most of this stuff is still classified. Now, why should that be classified? These people are all dead. This is all history. The Soviet Union's gone. There's no reason for any of this stuff to be classified now. Not that there ever was. And it's all to protect this kind of narrative of control of how we are to understand history and therefore how we are to understand life today. I mean, it's very, and it's becoming much, much worse now. You said we talked about James O'Keefe's videos taken down. You and I can talk about that. People in the know understand it. But the fact of the matter is that millions of people won't know about it because it doesn't exist. So they don't care. You and I can bellyache about this on my tiny station. So what? I mean, a few people know. But millions of people aren't going to know because they've censored that out. And I'm telling you, this next election, I mean, there was this interesting thing. I don't know if you saw this, but one of the reveals from the O'Keefe video is that somebody at a very high level, I think more than one person at Google, has said, we cannot let the Trump situation happen again. We can do things adjust our analytics to make sure it doesn't happen again. And that's what almost happened in this last election, by the way, in this midterm. You had people suddenly having their social network pulled down, including major candidates. Marsha Blackburn, senatorial candidate from Tennessee, Republican, had her website and social network taken down 2 weeks before the election. That's very suspicious. I mean, she won anyway, but the point is, I mean, do we really think that, the Democratic victory in that election wasn't influenced by this? I mean, they are controlling the means of communication. And they are a monopoly.
And in a heavy-handed way, very heavy-handed way.
And they're a monopoly. They are, I don't care what you say. I know it's a private company. It's a monopoly.
Well, I mean, everybody should rally around this one. I mean, you can go, you don't necessarily have to go down my rabbit holes, because I think it's a lot worse than anything anybody could possibly imagine. But everybody should rally around that. That's just low-hanging fruit. I mean, come on, people. That's what you should be hitting the streets on.
There are
Is
enough
why
people.
all the censorship, why all the destruction of the First Amendment, and they've got these young people believing that that's the thing to do.
Yeah, they do.
Them.
They've ramped up this absolutely demented and completely irrational hatred for President Trump as this great Satan. And so there's almost like a computer, like people have a little computer chip implanted in the back of their skulls. And then the story comes out, like some kind of a shocking story. He said this, he did that. And all of a sudden,
I see that in people I know. I think a lot of that's a distraction. I really do. I think it's sort of a distraction to get people away from what's really going on.
It's mind control.
They're so absorbed with Trump and the Trump drama. I just tune it out. I don't like it. I think it's actually part of the design. So I just differ with you on this, what the role of Trump is. But irregardless, it's having a major effect on the psyche. It is. It's just kind of like,
I believe it's part of the MK Ultra program, how to manipulate the masses. It was patented actually by the Nazis, who were brilliant at this. You know, they would create, I don't know if you've ever seen those films of like the rallies at Nuremberg, you know, by Leni Riefenstahl. They would create an emotional experience for thousands of people simultaneously by use of sound, sight, smell. You know, they would burn these big bonfires. They would have certain, you know, the music, marching, you know, the Wagner, and then the great glorious leader would come out, and people were fainting. Women were having orgasms. I mean, it was like right? I mean, it was like a collective experience. I think that the lessons learned from that are used by today's establishment, you know, to manipulate the masses on a mass scale. So every time there is I've seen this, you've seen this with people, and I know, putting aside what we think of Donald Trump, you know, when there's something terrible, he says something, in many cases completely manufactured, like his statement about the Charlottesville. He didn't say, it was a complete hoax, but they would hold this up, they would cut a piece of it, and they would present this, and suddenly people would literally physically change. They would go into
but then it just ends up just dominating Twitter. So Twitter ends up being a very poor source of information. It just dominates the discourse everywhere. And so people like you and I that may be interested in some real research into something don't have anywhere to go because everything's just blocked out by the discourse between these factions, fake factions, I think. I really do. I think they're fake factions. I just look at it completely different. I think it's all a big psyop. But the bottom line is that it's a distraction away from the truth. And, you know, and you're just, if you support Trump, you're called a Nazi. If you don't, you know, they use all these epithets and all this terminology. I mean, they even called Trump an anti-Semite. I mean, come on, that guy's no anti-Semite. He's the biggest friend of Israel's ever had. So the accusations are just incredible. And then you've got the stuff hitting the street. I don't know if you're following what's happening in Portland, where they just turned the streets over to a bunch of thugs.
Right. Oh yeah. No, that's you know that's almost like a revolution, and it's all looking the other way, and you know you cannot criticize these people who are you know no different than the white supremacists. I mean, it's the same flip side of the same coin.
Well, this might be your civil war. This might be setting up your civil war. Yeah, this might be setting up your civil war when you take cities. And I used to live in Portland. I loved Portland. I lived in there 15 years ago. And it was always kind of a progressive town. You know, the people that I knew there were good progressives, good liberals, and good anti-war movement. I met some great people there, and I was a little more conservative minded even. But now it's turned into a cesspool. How did this happen? Give me your ideas of what happened in Portland in the last 15 years. I kind of want to hear your view on it.
Well, I mean, I think that looking at it as an outsider, I think it's being used as a petri dish for a revolution. You know, the radicals have been able to run freely and not be criticized. In fact, it's seen as, you know, it's sort of like driving conservative talkers out of Berkeley College too. These are people. I mean, they drove Ben Shapiro, for God's sakes, out of Berkeley. I mean, who's he? He's like this kind of nerdy, sort of slightly conservative, mainstream, young commentator. He couldn't speak there because they were banging on the walls and burning stuff. I mean, and this was permitted by that administration. So I don't know. I mean, is it essentially giving a green light to anarchists? It is, but is that part of an agenda? What do you think?
Well, I think it's what Nesta Webster talked about in spades. And she wrote a great book called World Revolution and talked about this very thing, how it worked and how they come up with this fraternity, liberty, equality, sloganism to gain power over other people and push these impossible narratives. I mean, it's pretty hard to have liberty and equality at the same time. They kind of contradict each other in a lot of ways. And so you create these slogans, and then they get power by just silencing and crushing anybody that gets in their way. It's been going on since the invention of Luminism, the French Revolution, all the revolutions of the 1800s. It's now in full. It's a formula that's in full swing, and it's very communistic. Definitely is. It is sort of has a leftist bent to it. And they've just formalized it and they're putting it in place in the United States. It's sad to see. I mean, the way Portland has changed in the last 15 years is another thing that's really shocked me.
It's ugly. And also all those cities which are under control of very liberal governments are horrible right now. Garbage on the street, shit everywhere, homeless. This is the product, these are the real shithole states.
I mean, even Seattle. I mean, Seattle. I lived in it for a long time. It's just to have all this street element taken over.
Yeah, and that's thanks to those liberal governments that they continue to elect, and conservatism seems like it's almost.
No, but they don't just elect liberals in the sense that the people that I knew they're electing a lot of homosexuals who kind of push their agenda. It's gone way, way past the old idea of, well, just leave us alone. What we do in our bedroom is our business. No, they're pushing their whole narrative on the rest of society. The mayor of Portland, homosexual. The mayor of Seattle, homosexual. Where do they, they're like 4% of the population. What are they doing running these cities? I don't get it. South Bend, the guy running South Bend, running for president.
Sure, Pete, yeah. Well, and the problem is that because they have this sort of special status, they cannot be criticized.
Exactly. Protected status.
It's well, we could get into that. That's a whole show, and we should do it. But I'm kind of reaching. I don't want to go too long. But Russ, this is really interesting. We should do this regularly. In fact, I'd like to have you as a regular contributor here. Let my listeners know where they can find out more information about you and about your excellent publication.
It's winterwatch.net. That's pretty much it. No YouTube channels or anything like that. No active YouTube channels. I actually did a YouTube video 5 years ago on the rise of psychopathy. I was actually watching that again the other day. It's not bad. It wasn't fully developed then. I didn't quite get the full picture, but it's still a good video.
I'll check it out. What is it called?
It looks kind of suppressed. It's only had 6,000 views. It was kind of a nicely produced video.
I'll look it up. What is it called again?
What's it called? Let me see if I can find it. Oh, you know where it is? It's on my page, my video page. You go to my video.
Can we get there to watch?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Let me. We'll direct everyone to Winter Watch. Just put in Russ Winter Watch, and you'll see this interesting news site come up where you really go into some pretty cutting edge stuff. And I urge people to check it out. It's amazing.
I mean, I go after everybody. I really do. I think that some people might consider me an anti-Semite, but I have to tell you, I spare nobody. I don't spare anybody. I unload on everybody.
Oh, me too. I mean, and certainly the Jewish establishment probably hates me, and I'm basically an observant Jew.
So you're basically considered a self-hater, and I'm considered an anti-Semite for unloading on everybody.
Basically, yeah, that's it in a nutshell. Anyway, Russ, listen, I want to thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. The show will be up on YouTube, hopefully, God willing, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, thanks, Charles.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.